Hi everyone, Emmerron here. For those of you who don't already know me from my stream, welcome to my channel here on YouTube. For those of you who do, welcome back. I'm glad you found me here. This is the first video that I've done as direct content here on my channel that was not recorded while live on stream. So before we get started, as such, I would like to invite each and every one of you who are watching this video to please like the video if you find it valuable, if you think that I'm worth it. Each like, each comment does help appease the corporate god of YouTube and its algorithm, and it will help me spread love of the games that I cover here on the channel to a wider audience, which ultimately is my goal. I love games like Cyberpunk RED. I have several others that I'm looking at in the not too distant future here to share with all of you as well. And so by liking, subscribing, commenting, it'll help me be that much more proactive in the reach that I have when those videos do eventually come out. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So earlier today, I made a short that was kind of clickbait, kind of not, but it was probably controversial for several of you who are big D&D fans. So if you haven't canceled me on Twitter already by the time I get to this video, welcome to the discussion and the longer, more detailed look at what I covered in that short as kind of a joke. So we're going to be talking about death and how it compares between the systems of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and Cyberpunk RED. So for those of you who are finding me here on YouTube and have not watched my Twitch streams, one, I stream every Monday night on Twitch at 7 p.m. Arizona time. I run a game there called Neon Inferno. It is a week-to-week kind of adventure of the week type game that I run with a couple of my friends and some of the streamers that I work with. And together we just try to tell great stories each week and kind of showcase the game and really kind of what it's capable of and what we truly love about it. So if you haven't watched any of those content, I do have all of those here on my channel. You can watch them right up over here. You can watch all of those over here. Or if you go to my channel below, I will have all of those VODs available for you all to watch, and you can, look at those and let me know if, some of this maybe resonates with you a little better after watching some of those examples. And I will have a story here at the end of this video to kind of cover a little more in depth what some of these concepts are. For those of you who are uninitiated with tabletop role-playing games, this video is probably going to be dense. It's going to be a little complicated. I am going to use some jargon that is familiar to those people who have played a tabletop game before, such as Dungeons & Dragons or Cyberpunk. Things like difficulty values or difficulty challenges, DC, DV. Those are terms that I'll use pretty quick and loose in this video. So I do plan on going over some of that in a video in the future for those of you who are completely new to the whole space of tabletop games. It's a fantastic space. I've been playing them in some form or another since I was about 17, which was about 13 years ago, and I hate it. But I have loved tabletop gaming. It's given me a lot of the friends that I still have today. And it is a space that if you are seriously considering getting into, find yourself a table or make yourself a table. I learned them as a GM. I've been a GM pretty much the whole time I've played tabletop. And I think it's perfectly viable to learn games that way. Just read your book carefully. Pay attention to modules that you're running, read them, try to run them as close to the book as possible, and you'll be here running your 13th year game as a GM before you know it too. So let's dive into the actual topic of today's video. So we're talking about death. We're talking about when the real tragic, sad thing happens and someone starts to die and their character is on the way out. What does that look like when we talk about it in Cyberpunk? What does that look like when we talk in D&D? So I am today predominantly a Cyberpunk player. I don't play D&D as much as I used to. Most of my friends are Cyberpunk players as well, although all of us, including the group that I still play Cyberpunk with, we came to tabletops through D&D. So it's still something that holds a near dear place in my heart personally. And for many of you, I'm sure that that's true as well. I know that this year has not been a great year for that game, for the company that runs it. It's been problematic and it's been stressful, I know. So we're going to cover D&D's rules first. So I'm going to go through those things. I'm going to try and provide some visual aids here as much as I can to make it a little easier to kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about, because it's going to get nebulous pretty quick. But hopefully you'll follow along. Hopefully this won't be too hard to follow, especially if you've played the games for a bit. So in D&D, it is a more complex system than the one used in Cyberpunk RED. Even though I will definitely go more at length with Cyberpunk's system later, because there's a lot of nuance, I think, to the finer points of how it works and why that's a good thing. D&D's is a more complex system, full stop. Mostly because, unlike Cyberpunk's, you're dealing with quotas. So you're looking to achieve either 3 successes or 3 failures on what's known as a death saving throw. For those of you who are well initiated into tabletop games, this is probably gonna be old hat. Those of you who are newer, let me kind of explain what a death save is. So death saving throws are, you roll a dice. Depending on the game, there's usually a type of dice that you will roll to see if you succeed or you fail something. In Dungeons & Dragons, that is a 20-sided dice, or what we call a d20. So when you roll that d20, you are looking to see what number it rolls up on. So unless there is some bonus or piece of equipment or a spell or something that alters this particular type of save for you, you are largely usually just going to be rolling a d20, and you're going to see if it lands on a 10 or higher, or if it lands on a 9 or less. And if you roll 10 or higher, congrats, you got your first of 3 successes. If you rolled a 9 or lower, unfortunately you got your first of 3 failures, but you're not dead until you hit that 3rd failure. So if you roll on the extreme ends of the spectrum, so you roll a 20 on the high end or a 1 on the low end, a 20 means you immediately come back to life with 1 health. So you come back to life with 1 health after being at 0 health, which is really cool because now you're no longer dying. You are alive. You're no longer unconscious. You're standing up, able to fight again, right? If you roll a 1, though, you suffer 2 failures instead of the 1. So that obviously gets very scary very fast, right? Because now you're 1 failure from death. But even if you die in D&D, there are things like healing magic that can bring you back, things like Revivify, or even just resurrection spells of different kinds. There are ways to bring back the dead, right? There's that safety gap that if a party is determined enough and they want to do so, they can bring back one of their dead party members. They can bring back that fallen comrade. So in D&D, there are a couple of ways you can save a player who is dying, but you as the dying player cannot be one of those people. So you can't save yourself. The people near you, however, can try and mend your wounds with a medicine skill check, and they need to just roll a DC 10, which is pretty low by all accounts. It's not very difficult, especially if you have training in it. That's a pretty easy ask. Or if they heal you with anything, a potion or a spell, they heal you at all, you're coming back from as though it's from 0. So you're just coming back with whatever healing they've given you via that healing spell. If they stabilize you with that medicine check I mentioned earlier, you're still unconscious and you're still treated as only having no health, right? But you're not dying anymore. So at least you've spared yourself that problem. So now it's just a matter of getting your healing. And the good news is that if you are stabilized for a while, it's 1d4 hours. Do I have a 4-sided dice here? I'll get a 4-sided dice. Give me just a moment. So this is a 4-sided dice. It looks like a little 3-sided pyramid. So basically, we would roll one of these, and however many hours that ends up being for the roll, right? So if it's a 1, it's 1 hour. If it's 3, it's 3 hours, etc. After that many hours, you get a hit point back after being stabilized. So that's pretty cool, right? Like, we can just sit there, wait and chill, and after a couple hours at most, I'm back. Like, I'm able to walk out of it on my own 2 feet. Pretty sweet deal. Like that's pretty great. But I think it's boring. I'll be honest. I think it's very boring. Because here's the thing, right? What happens if you and your party go into a dungeon, you start fighting something that maybe is just a little out of your range, right? Something that we might consider like a mini boss, right? So you're fighting this mini boss and you keep going down. Now, say you have a cleric, right? Or some other kind of healer on your party. Someone with the ability to pull you back from death or back from the brink of death. If you have that person who can just heal you with a spell, even just a couple times before they need to take a break or something, you can, in theory, keep going up against that boss or that enemy that should, by all means, outclass you. And it's essentially just taking little micro naps in the middle of this fight that should be a pitched battle for survival. And you just kind of have to hope, like, okay, like, do I keep coming up? And if you do, you just kind of keep fighting it. You take micro nap, you come up, start killing them again, right? And even though if you go down and you take a hit, that's an automatic failure. As long as your healer's getting to you before you hit that third failure, you're still alive. And most importantly, that slate of failures is wiped clean every time they stabilize or heal you out from under death. So the only way to die, with like absolute 100% certainty in this case, is a mechanic known as instant death via taking too much damage all at once. So the way that works, say that your character's total health pool is 16, right? And before they take this hit, they're at 8 health. So let's now say you take a hit, and that hit has enough damage that you lose all your remaining hit points, so the 8 life you have remaining, in addition to another 16 damage, right? So 24 in total, right? If you take 24 or more all at once, so enough to do your remaining health and then your full health pool again, you immediately die. You don't even get the chance to save from death, you just die. And so there, okay, we have some stakes, right? Like if something can hit me hard enough, something can do that much damage all at the same time, you die outright. The problem is, a lot of cases, unless your GM is specifically designing this to be deadly in that way, there aren't a lot of scenarios once you're beyond the first couple levels of the games, usually, where that'll be a problem. So now you are, again, back to taking micro naps in the middle of a boss fight. And eventually you just kind of get to take it down. You're like, yay, cool, I got 1 health left, but here I am, we killed it. Cool. Well, now you walk from that and you're like, cool, we get the loot, we get the cool recognition, the king loves us, whatever. That's great. But so let's take a moment and let's examine even if this happens, right? You go down, you die. Now let's examine, what does dying itself look like? Not just being the state of dying, but actually dying, right? When a character goes into the state of dying, so where you're rolling your death saves, you go unconscious. You aren't talking, you aren't acting, you aren't doing anything. With some exceptions, but the general rule is that you are unconscious, right? So barring something like a class feature or something that lets you ignore that, you're unable to do anything. You're unable to talk, you're unable to see, you're unable to do anything. So lately, I've seen a ton of YouTube shorts and TikToks that are focused on what do we do about the dying problem in D&D, talking about how anticlimactic it can be to have someone die while being unable to give any last words or say or do really anything, right? They can't intervene on their own death. They can't reveal something like, I'm the wizard's long lost son. None of that's there, right? You don't get that moment of like closure. You don't get that moment of dramatic exit from the game. You just die. So short of like throwing yourself heroically into the dragon, plunging your sword down into its head, and then diving with it to the ground, certainly dying in the process yourself, that is the only time you're really ever going to die in this game and have it really feel as though like you got that beautiful little out, right? Where you kind of get to go off into the sunset and you get to have that really heroic feeling of like, I died for something, right? So this is why I say that D&D death is very boring, right? It doesn't allow us a lot of space to really express what it means to lose not only our own character, but for us to lose a teammate, right? If it's someone else's at the table. So I want to cover one additional thing here. And I think I've kind of touched on this throughout this part of the video so far. But one of the great parts of storytelling, one of the most dramatic elements of storytelling, is when stakes are at play, right? When it matters what happens to us and when we have investment in not allowing something bad to happen to us or others around us, right? So without stakes, the drama starts to feel lacking, right? And it's not very dramatic to just fall asleep and die. It just isn't. It hardly ever will be, right? There will be very few cases where that'll feel as dramatic as having someone gasp out their last words and say, I cared for you all. Carry on in my stead. It's like that, even though that's corny, in the right context, that will move people to tears. I promise you. I've seen it happen. I've not always been a great GM. I would still argue even now I'm not the best GM that I could be, but I'm better than when I started. And I got some people crying their eyes out with corny lines like that, given the right moment. So that said, we're going to ignore things like homebrew for the purposes of this video. We're not going to draw comparisons between the games using homebrew as a baseline, because the golden rule of tabletop is you could always make a new rule, right? You can always change an existing rule if the one that exists doesn't work for you or your table. So in order to make this comparison as clean as I can make it, giving that there will be some differences between obviously the systems that underlie Cyberpunk and D&D, we are going to talk just rules as written. So rules as written, death in D&D feels low stakes, very boring, because even in the moments where you do die, you largely are going to go unconscious and quietly into the afterlife. So now let's talk about my game. Let's talk about Cyberpunk RED. So in Cyberpunk RED, we need to first talk about how do we resolve skill checks. So for those of you who are coming from D&D, which is, you know, unquestionably the more popular of the two games and the more well-known, I would argue. In D&D, obviously, you use a D20. I covered that at the start of the video. You use a 20-sided die, you roll it, you add a modifier, you get a result. That we compare to a number. And if that number is equal to or less than the roll you just made, you pass the check or hit the attack or whatever, right? You succeed. So in Cyberpunk, there's a couple of notable differences there with how we resolve our skill checks. The first and most important being is we use a D10, right? So our check die is not a D20, it is a D10. And our damage is done using multiples of D6. So we do not use any size of die other than 10s and 6s. And occasionally, you know, for roll tables like a D100, right? So we, by and large, are primarily going to have a lot lower of a chance to pass certain skill checks, right? So the way that our skills resolve, though, is very similar to D&D, with the sole exception of we're rolling on a D10 instead of a D20. And so we're still adding a stat, and all those stats have skills underneath of them. However, yet again, there is a difference in that Cyberpunk, unlike D&D, does not have a ton of class-specific features. We do not have a lot of role abilities that differentiate one character to the next as dramatically as you'd probably see in D&D, right? So in D&D, a ranger and a fighter are going to look very different most of the time, right? Like maybe they both play with bows for a little bit, but they're by and large, they're going to look pretty different. Whereas in Cyberpunk, skills are pretty much it, right? Like we have each role, which is our equivalent kind of classes, Our roles give us at most maybe 3 abilities, right? Like, and they're pretty much all contained to one parent ability that kind of gives us sub points if there are some multiple choices that we can make. So bottom line, that is like one very unique thing that our character can do that someone who isn't the same role as us cannot do. And there are a couple of roles for which that difference is more dramatic than others. I'll cover those in other videos later. It's not really the point of the video today. But bottom line, you need to understand, if you're coming from D&D, our skills matter a lot more in terms of what our characters are capable of doing. And as such, we can customize our characters to be very unique, right? So even though I might play, let's say, a med tech, right? Like I'm the medical class for the game. I'm a med tech, but my med tech compared to another guy's med tech is going to be, I practiced with my handguns and assault rifles. So in addition to being a doctor, I can shoot things and do so very well. The other guy might have focused all on social skills. So like they might have one skill that lets them fire a gun in self-defense when they're attacked on the street, like a handgun. But if it comes down to it, they're not really going to be there to fight. They're mainly there to socialize. They're going to talk their way out of the bad situation more than they will anything else. So this leads me now to discussing about how we die in Cyberpunk and what the process and the chicks of all that looks like, right? So in Cyberpunk RED, if someone goes to 0 or lower HP, you do not immediately make a death save, which is already a difference from D&D where you roll one right at the beginning. So in that sense, it starts a little merciful. We're going to strip that away. That sense of mercy is not going to be there for long. So you start there. You hit 0, you're dying. You're mortally wounded is what we would say. Now, while you are mortally wounded in Cyberpunk RED, you can still do stuff. You take a huge penalty. You have a -4 to all checks before you apply any positive modifiers or anything. You take a -4 straight up. So it makes doing anything that takes a lot of skill, it makes that much harder, if not nearly completely impossible, right? There's one kind of exception to this, which is in Cyberpunk, if we roll a 10 or a 1, you roll an additional D10 on top of that first one. So if you rolled a 10, that second die is an additive. It adds a positive modifier to whatever you rolled, and you can get insanely high numbers by doing that. If you roll a 1, it's the opposite. You subtract it. So in the case of rolling a 1 on a skill that you're very proficient at, you might be able to still pass your check, because we don't do a hard fail or a hard success on a 10 or a 1. We do gradients still. We still are comparing it against whatever our difficulty value, the DV of our check is, or the DV to hit our opponent is, or whatever they contested in our roll. We're still comparing those numbers. We just now have a lesser chance of potentially hitting that. So I say that because that -4 now that we're taking from being a dying character doesn't actually pan out to being that bad, right? Like that could just be a minor inconvenience if you're well trained enough. So first benefit now is we can talk. We can say, if we are dying right here, we can say our last words. That's already a huge improvement. And in the best case scenario, we can do something crazy when we die, right? Or just before, where we kill that boss, or that's our last act, right? We get to do the thing, murder the guy, or, clear the mission, and everyone goes on without us, and we die this most heroic of deaths. And we get to talk about it and feel really bittersweet about the character dying because they got that last badass moment to shine. So we talk about that, and that's cool, right? -4, it's a lot, but it's not that bad in the big context of doing things that you do well. So now we talk about difficulty value, right? You need to beat the difficulty value. It's not equal to, it is greater. You have to roll greater than the difficulty value in order to succeed at stuff. So again, we're getting to the point where that is going to start mattering in a moment here. So the thing that a player, whether it's the person who is dying or one of their comrades, needs to do to save them from that, similar to D&D, is you can make a check, and we get 2 in Cyberpunk. We have paramedic, we have first aid. Either one will work. Paramedic is way more specialized and it can do some other cool things, but ultimately they have the same DV. You need to beat a DV 15 if someone is mortally wounded. So in other words, when you roll that D10, you need your stat plus whatever level in either of those skills you're rolling on, plus the result of your 10 needs to be 16 or higher because the DV is 15. So you have to beat that. So if you're trained in first aid, like my character is in the game I play, I'm a med tech. I know medicine. That is what I'm good at. That's what I should be good at. And so I'm going to know how to do that much better than our team's like solo, which is like the gunman in the game. They're like our fighter equivalent. So I'm going to be better than they are at saving the guy next to me when they go down. So if I succeed on that, and only if I succeed on that, do they go unconscious. And they go unconscious for a minute. They come back to 1 health, so they're no longer dying. And that's great, right? So now let's go down another layer here. So like I've been saying, so far it probably sounds in Red like the system's pretty merciful. Sounds like it's not very punishing. But this is where we start stripping away that veneer of like, wow, this is really great. It's really easy. We do not have a quota system in Red. So there is no, you roll the right number and you're just suddenly back to health. There is no, you roll 3 successes and you stabilized and you're good. In Cyberpunk, we have, you roll and hope that you roll under whatever your body is. Body is a stat. It's similar to Constitution in D&D. It is one of the 2 stats that controls your health pool, and it is a determiner of how strong you are, how physically fit you are, how durable you are, and as such, if you have a higher body, you are gonna have a way harder time dying, in theory, right? So all stats in Cyberpunk have a soft cap of 8. And so while there are pieces of equipment or gear or items that you can equip that will allow you to break that cap, in a lot of cases, that is as high as it goes. Body is one of the few stats for which that cap can be lifted. It can go as high as 15. And so now you're looking at me like, Emmerron, you just told me they need to roll under their body. And you guys, you plebeians, you roll D10s. You roll the weird circle die. You don't run the dodecahedron that I do, and therefore you'll never beat that 15. That person's immortal. They are a god. They will not die. And to that I say, the game is not stupid, and you should still play it, because there is a failure that is built in, even if you are above 10 on your body. And that is, if you roll a 10 on a D10, you fail immediately, regardless. So even if your body is insanely high, you can fail. You have a 10% shot at failure even then, which, like I was told one time, it depends on when you look at a percentage as to whether it sounds low or it sounds kind of high. And it doesn't matter how close to 100 it is. 10%, 1 out of 10 is pretty high, right? Even that sounds pretty high when you consider in D&D you need like a couple turns at least usually before you'll be dead, right? So, all right. So we've got that. There's another thing too. Every time you succeed with your death save, and so you've managed to roll under your body and you're like, yeah, I'm a big old Goliath cyborg. I have 15 body, rawr. I am scary. You will not end me. I will not die here. And you don't roll a 10 on that first roll. Well, now that you've succeeded that first roll, your modifier on that death save goes up by 1. So now, even though that, that +1 for your 15 body kill master solo is not going to like really stop you, it's still the case where you need to roll a 10 on the next one. If your character is like an 8 body character or even lower, that first check coming up pass is like, oh, that's really good. Now my friends have a shot to save me. They have a chance to bring me back from the brink. This is awesome. I love it. Great. Well, now you've got a 10% lower chance the next time of passing that. And if you are below 10 body already, you are already looking at a higher chance of failure, right? You're already with an 8 body, you have a 30% chance of failure on that first roll. You have a 40% chance of failure on the second. Because again, you need to roll below, not equal, but full below. So it'll be 7 or lower on the first one, 6 or lower on the second one, because now your modifier is up by 1. So to add yet another layer to this, there is something in Cyberpunk that isn't in D&D called the critical injury system. Now, critical injuries are different than rolling a crit success on your attack, right? If you roll a crit success on an attack, you just add another D10. It just makes it so you hit through things that maybe would have been more difficult. A critical damage, a critical injury is, like I said before, we roll multiples of D6. So if 2 of our D6s come up on 6s, we have a critical injury we deal, or we suffer it if the enemy rolled it. So what that looks like is we roll on a table, and then we get to see what kind of horrible thing just happened to our edge runner. And while I'm not going to cover all of that here, it gets pretty bad. It can get pretty heinous real fast, right? You could lose a hand, you could lose an eye, you could lose a limb. Even the more mild things, they can make it so you can't move very far. Your leg breaks, and therefore you're way slower, almost sometimes just crawling on the ground, right? Like, you're not doing well after you suffer even one critical injury. And several of them increase your death save modifier by 1 automatically. Some of them, I think, even go up by 2. So when you're a low body character and your death save starts shooting up because you suffered critical injuries, now you've lost margin for success. Suddenly, what was a roll in your favor originally before you took that death save, or the death save penalty, I should say, now it's against you. Now you're rolling with a 40% chance that you live, right? That's not great. We don't like that. That gets really nerve-wracking. So now let's go the next final step down. The final truth bomb, little reality check that I have to drop on you here, right? If you fail a death save 1 time, that's all it takes. 1 time, you are dead. And we do not get the benefit of resurrection magic. Revivify doesn't exist. There is no bringing someone back from the dead. Once they've died, they are dead forever. So that's heavy. Like, every time we pull out that D10 and have to make a death save, it's scary. Everyone at the table holds their breath and they breathe that sigh of relief when it rolls a 1, because you know that that's going to succeed. Almost every time that 1 is going to succeed. And like, that's just it. So we basically have this system here, which, even though, like I said, and I promised at the start of the video I do this, even though I've been long-winded about it and explaining kind of the intricacies of it, most of that is to explain the system. So now, with all of that kind of more or less understood, let's go over the TLDR, right? So to sum it all up, the TLDR is, if you start a turn mortally wounded, so you're dying, you roll a D10. If that result of that comes up as a 10 or equal to or greater than your body, you are dead immediately. Full stop. If it is less than that, you get to add 1 to your death save modifier, and you get to continue living another turn. And if you manage to be stabilized, those bonus death save modifiers do roll off. So unlike D&D, where we can keep getting up over and over forever without there being any penalty, you know, it does work kind of similar in this, but because our critical injuries can be a thing, because those can add to our death save modifiers, those don't go away. until we have them repaired at like a clinic or something, right? And healing in the game is incredibly slow. So you need to be stabilized. And then for every day that you spend resting after that stabilization, you get your body stat number wise, right? So if you have an 8 body, you recover 8 health each day that you spend resting doing almost nothing for the next however long it takes you to feel better, right? So that's a lot of time. That's not the long rest or even short rest that some of the like lower level healing spells might be able to regenerate off of. You're looking at a week in some cases to come back from these horrible injuries. So even if you do survive, now you're out of commission. And if it's a quick job that you need to do, you either need to risk dying or call it and leave because you just don't have the health or the endurance to stand on. So let's talk now why I think that and all of that explanation is a better system than D&D. So the first thing is it adds tension, right? Like I said before, rolling that first death save is tense, it is scary, everyone at the table is holding their breath, just what they want to see, right? Everyone's holding their breath and they want to see, is that going to roll a 1 or is it going to roll a 10? Is the Netrunner dead? Do they survive? So tension's great, right? And it also makes repeatedly going down, like I just described, much scarier. Because now it's not guaranteed that you're coming back out of that, right? You could just be dead forever. And that's horrifying. And the thing I want to add is that if you take hits while you're mortally wounded, those are immediate critical injuries. You roll another critical injury on top of what you already suffer. So there's a chance you just have more death save penalties now, and it's just going to stack up, right? And those are the permanent ones that until you get yourself mended at a clinic or a hospital, you are going to be dealing with that for the rest of whatever mission you're trying to run. So yeah, it makes it so that everything could be the last. So that's the first point. The second point is that it compares concrete numbers on a sheet, right? So unlike the D&D rule where you need to remember that it's 10 plus for a success and 9 less for a failure, and the special rules about a 20 or a 1, like all of that is stuff that like you as a player, it's not a lot of data, but like when you add that to all the other stuff you already are going to need to be doing when you play that game, you're already going to be struggling as a new player, especially to like keep all of that compartmentalized in your head. And that is not great, right? It's not great when you're a new player trying to like remember a rule on the fly, especially if you're playing with a group of experienced people. You know, you kind of feel bad, like, oh man, I'm holding this back. It's not great. And even though we as like experienced players should be doing our best to keep those people feeling welcome, it definitely is part of the learning curve, right? So having as many things that we can just track on our character sheet and say, okay, this is my body, this is my death save penalty, roll it, cool, I rolled under even with the penalty, I'm alive. That's all on my sheet. I don't need to remember any fancy rules other than the fact that I need to roll under my body, which is like a very, very simple thing to remember. So that's great too. It's an accessibility thing. And the third and final thing I want to talk about is that even while dying, because you have the ability to interact with the world around you, you get those send-off moments. You get those dramatic turns in the battle at the 11th hour, and you get those dramatic last words that say, take this, find my lost friend, find my brother, whatever, find them. And now the party's got a quest that is so separate from everything else they're doing, but it feels so important because now their dead comrade gave this to them. And so unless that dead comrade was an asshole, they're probably going to do it. And so now that we've got that long-winded, very nerdy explanation out of the way, I'm going to sum all this together with a story for you. And this is from a table I was part of. I was a player at this table. So this is going to kind of, I think, drive home why this is one of my favorite things in any tabletop role-playing game ever. Death in Cyberpunk RED is one of my favorite things. And in addition to being a GM, which you can come watch me at Twitch every Monday at 7 p.m. Arizona time, we talk with you. The crew talks with you. You should come and join us. It's a lot of fun. But that aside, at this table, I was a player with some of my real life friends. And I, in this story, am playing the role of a med tech. So again, I am the medic. I am trained in being able to fight, but I'm a medic. And joining me, I have a media named Raven and a netrunner, in-universe hacker, known as Isaac. So these are the cast that we're going into. So let me start by explaining the job so that you have the full context for this. So our crew's brought in by the leader of the gang that we all run with to help one of her subordinates with a personal matter. And this subordinate tells us that her daughter had been killed a couple months prior and that she'd been following up on it, and more people like her daughter have started to die. All of them netrunners, all of them plugged into networks at the time that they die. So this is already mysterious. And she says, I've commissioned this scanner from a specialist tech named Faisal. I need you to go get it from the dock. And the moment we have that thing in our hands and we are about to take it to meet our contacts who are going to help us use it, we get attacked by drones. They start dive bombing us, they start shooting us, they start cutting us up. We're in danger immediately. So we managed somehow to disable all of these drones and we leave. And we managed to get to our contacts, mostly, put together. And with their help, over the course of several days, we managed to track and eventually isolate down the signal of this thing that's been attacking all these people. And we find out it's a rogue AI, a sentient program that, by definition, usually they are very violent. This one certainly was. It's enslaving people, turning them into zombies against their own will by using their cyberware. So this is dangerous. This is very dangerous. We encounter some of these zombified people and we're given some weapons to act against them after we see how dangerous they are. And even then, they're scary. Like, they come after you, they swarm you like a horde, and you're on the back foot real fast. So we eventually narrow it down that this rogue AI has been cornered. After we've deleted the rest of its copies of itself, it is cornered in this club near our part of the city. And so at this point, we've inadvertently gotten the police involved. We've got our crew that's been helping us hunt this thing up to this point. So we go into the club knowing it's an AI. So our netrunner is going to be invaluable. Our hacker is ready to tear this thing out of the network with his own, powers. And netrunners are kind of like wizards. They're pretty squishy and they die pretty quick if you don't defend them properly. So I was playing the role of the bodyguard, as was our media. And our media goes down pretty fast. Our media goes down. I end up stabilizing them. They're unconscious on the ground for a minute. So I am, with the help of Isaac, but mostly on my own power, I'm holding off the real enemies so that Isaac can dive into the network further and can hack away at this AI and disable him and hopefully bring this to a happy conclusion. And so we get to a point where I'm into or just above single-digit health. I'm badly wounded. And in my inventory as a med tech, I've got a couple of drugs that I can use. And at this point, everyone in our group had benefited from something called a speed heal. It's the only thing we have in the game that's like a potion, and you can only use it once per person per day. And so it is very, very limited. There's one other drug I have in my inventory, though, which is a stim. It's like an adrenaline shot. So it lets anyone ignore the effects of being wounded, essentially, so they don't take their penalties like they normally would. So I hit our netrunner with this stim, and I say, kid, I will stitch you up. I will pull you out of this, and all you got to do is take this guy out. You take this guy out, and I will stitch you back up. You walk out of here. And he is standing there, head on fire, bleeding down his mouth, slumped against the wall, and he looks back at me and just says, "Don't worry, I got this." He coughs up a little blood, and continues fighting this thing in the network. And I have readied my action because I'm higher in our initiative queue to immediately roll a stabilization check as soon as he has taken this thing out. And so he rolls his attack against this thing, gets a critical hit, knocks it out. Me, him, the GM, and our other player are all ecstatic. We're jumping out of our seats. We are cheering. We're clapping. It's very exciting, right? And so I have held my action, and I cannot fail this check physically, except when what happened happens, and that is I rolled a 1. And even a 1 followed by a 1, where I'm only really losing 1 off my check, it's enough to not save him. So we're all celebrating. I roll a 1, and then I look at my GM and I tell him, hey, I rolled a 1. I failed. And he just looks. He says, okay, well, Isaac, roll us a death save. And Isaac rolls a 10. So at this point, I'm really nervous because my character, all characters in Cyberpunk have a stat called humanity. It determines how close to going insane you are. If you've watched Cyberpunk Edge Runners, you'll be familiar with cyberpsychosis. This is how we measure that in the tabletop game. So I've got about, I think at this point, 4 humanity left. Mind you, I have a maximum humanity of 80. So that should tell you how close to insanity I am. And I've been talking a big game about I'm not going to let anyone die. Everyone's going to stay alive under my watch. I will protect all of you. And I've been doing this for weeks at this point. And it's been a big part of my role play is like, I am the guardian angel of this party. I'm not going to let any of you die. And then someone dies. And so I, upon seeing the failure and upon, like the two of us just kind of talking about it for a little bit, I say, all right, so I look over at Isaac, I grab his shoulders and I say, kid, you did it. You did it, kid. We got him. Kid. And it's only then that the medical scanner built into my arm that I notice it's reading a flat line. I'm looking down at that. I'm hearing that flat line. And it's at that point that my GM says, okay, it's time. Emmerron, roll me a D6. Let's see how much humanity you lose. I didn't go insane. Thank God I rolled a 1. So I have 3 humanity as of the time of this recording on that character. But I'm still sane enough to take control of my own character. So the way I roleplay this is I lash out at every dead body that's gathered in this room as we've been holding our own. And I'm stabbing them, I'm cutting them, I'm angered, I'm aggrieved, I am inconsolable. And I eventually pick up the unconscious body of our media. I walk out. I tell our allies that are in the room with us to just take Isaac and pull him out with us. And as our media starts waking up, he says, what happened? And I, the player, try to add a little quiver to my voice, like, I lost him. I can't believe he's gone. And like, just saying, I failed. I should have done better. And he's trying to console me, saying like, no, you couldn't have done any better. You did what you could. I know you wouldn't have failed him. That's not what you did. You did your best and he was beyond saving. And so what starts as me trying to add a quiver to my voice for effect turns into actual crying. And before long, all of us are sitting around this table, bawling our eyes out because we are all feeling the loss of this character. We won. We did it. The mission's clear. The enemy lies defeated. And yet from from this grand victory, in the shadow of this victory, we are experiencing loss and we are mourning together. And I think more than anything that illustrates why a system like this is so critical, because we would not have felt that way if there had been another shot at him coming back alive, right? whether that came through, the equivalent of like a revivify or healing, or even just getting an extra death save opportunity, right? Like all of these things would have cheapened that moment. And so we get to this point now where we go back to our club where our gang hangs out, and we report into our employer, the subordinate of our boss that has said, I'm going to sleep better than I have in months now. And I just tell her, very empty, I'm glad someone will. And she just says, and I'm so sorry for your loss. He was a good kid. And that's it. We have drinks in front of us. Try to drink it away a little bit. I've got a medical studio in the club, and I go there and prepare him to get cremated. And again, there's just this somber overtone this whole time we're working through the end of this session, to the point that I decide to roleplay because I've got a whole host of drugs in my inventory, several of which would send me spiraling into insanity. And I roleplay like, yeah, Virgil, my character, goes back to his cargo container and he looks at the row of street drugs lined out on his dresser. And he thinks individually about each one and how bad it would mess him up and which ones would send him screaming over the edge just so this could all be over. And then he remembers what Isaac told his drug addict brother just a couple minutes before we walked into that combat in the club. And he says, this is not the way. You're better than this. And with that said, I pass out because I know this isn't what Isaac would have wanted. And everyone's still bawling their eyes out. Everyone suffers emotional damage. Everybody. And I think that those are the moments that systems like this give us. And I think that's why so many of the homebrews we're starting to see for D&D death come eerily close to kind of mimicking the way that that system operates. So in conclusion, I think that systems where death is truly a meaningful and it's a stake-laden thing, like what I just illustrated, it'll always trump those systems where death feels more like an inconvenience or at most a roadblock, right? Because feeling lost in the shadow of a victory allows our characters to be shaped by that. It lets us tell a better story, not just for those of us who are GMs running the show. It lets our players have agency. It let me as a player have agency over what followed there. How did we feel about that? What are we going to do with that moving forward? It's going to shape him. And that's the cool part of a death that matters, is that it's not just about the character who died. It's about the legacy they leave the crew that sits at the table with them. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments if you have any fun stories or any dramatic moments like what I shared in the video here. I'd love to hear them. Or, let me know if you're a D&D player and you have any neat homebrew ideas, because again, I don't think that we're opposed. I think we all stand taller as a community when we're all just tabletop RPG enthusiasts and we get to borrow from each other. Because I think a lot of cases here, those are going to be the ways we make all of our games better and we make better homebrews for what we do. So again, please please subscribe. If you think I've earned it, I want to reach more people with videos like this. But until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And I'll see you in the streets of Night City.